Ever felt like self-care just isn't cutting it? What about shifting from me to we? We know we're stronger together and that the weight of the world is more easily shared when carried together. Join us as we push to shift our mindset from self-care to community care because together we can do hard things and no one deserves to be alone. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble. We're here to burst that bubble. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives, and we're excited to delve into those with you today. We are your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. We're really excited for this episode today. It all started with a quote that I saw on Instagram, as one does on Bell Let's Talk Day, which is a day here in Canada where folks talk about mental health. And the quote was, and it will be linked in the show notes, that shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. And this really shook Cassie and I up. And we're going to dive into this, and we want to share the background of the quote. The quote comes from an individual named Nikita Valerio, who's an award-winning writer, researcher, and Muslim community organizer based in Edmonton, Canada. She's a graduate in history and Islamic Jewish studies from the University of Alberta and has been a research fellow with the Tesla Institute, the Institute for Religious and Socio-Political Studies, and the Edmonton Council of Muslim Communities, and Mercy Mission Canada. And we're grateful for her sharing this quote with the world several years ago and the chance to dive into it and explore it and see how it could possibly relate to camp. So Cassie, I feel like this really shook both of us when we saw it.
Yeah, for sure.
I sent it to you, and then we reflected on it, and then it's been a couple months since that day, and we're back at it and fired up about it. So why is this quote so important? We'll start broad, and then we'll get into the specifics.
I think it speaks volumes to how we could be doing better, and that we're so focused on the me, but not necessarily on the we.
Yep, absolutely. I think the world is so heavy these days. I mean, as we write this, we are sort of working through whatever the next phase of the pandemic might look like, and there's turmoil in the world. For those who might be listening down the road, the war in Ukraine is really ramping up. It's a challenging time. There's so much happening, and those are only a couple of them. And we burden a lot of that. That's a lot of burden for people to carry and to walk through the world with. And I think our staff show up at camp and they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And we say to them, we'll just do some self-care and it'll be okay.
But they're at camp.
But just go for a walk in the woods. It'll be okay.
Okay. But you know
what I mean? I think self-care really focuses on the individual's responsibility to be able to deal with the world. And the world is really freaking hard. I'm choosing my words carefully because we're on a podcast and I feel like I shouldn't swear. The world is a hard place. There's a meme going on Instagram that said, how am I expected to live, laugh, love under these conditions? And it's kind of true.
It's so true. When we're carrying everything with us, how can we expect our young people to do that? To carry everything with them and have what they need to be successful.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we should throw out the idea of self-care completely, because to me, self-care indicates that somebody is aware of sort of their own emotions, their own levels within their bodies, whether that's physiological, psychological. Self-care is somebody saying I know actually right now to be a better version of myself, maybe not my best self, because I think sometimes we are we need to be our best selves, and that's a really high bar. And sometimes when the world is hard, we can't be our best selves. We just need to be maybe a slightly better version of ourselves. Let's not set the bar too high. And so self-care is really good at getting us to that slightly better version of ourselves. It's eating so that we're not cranky. It's getting enough sleep because we need a baseline level of sleep to maintain some sort of health. It's connecting with people that mean a lot to us, but I don't think it's enough. And that's why I think we need to go beyond that idea of self-care.
Yeah. As you're saying all those things, it has me thinking of the bottom tier of Maslow's hierarchy, right? We need these things to survive.
Yes.
But to get to self-actualization, I believe, is the top. We need everything else.
I'm having a throwback to first year psych class at university.
Yep. And like, I feel like community care might help build up that hierarchy to get us to where we want to be or where we want our people to be.
Absolutely. And I would love to see camp directors latch on to the phrase community care with the same enthusiasm that we latched on to self care. And I think
Mhm.
there's going to be some resistance for a few reasons because community care means that it might affect our budgets. It might mean we need more
Mm,
staff. It might mean that we need a social worker on site. Like it might mean all of these things. And I think there's going to be a little bit of pushback. Self care is easier because it takes the responsibility away from the camp director and puts it on the 18-year-old counselor, the 19-year-old counselor that you have. But I think community care at camp is so cool because we are like creators of our own little universe. And I will recognize that I say this from an overnight camp perspective. But you're kind of the creator of your own little world. You set the
yeah.
schedule. Like, have you ever worked at a camp that has camp time and like it's like their own version of daylight savings time so that you can have more sun later in August?
Oh, I haven't, but I worked up north where daylight was all day.
Oh, well,
What?
okay. In
We,
Southern Ontario, that's not what happened. So they would have camp time. You're the creator of your own world. They just shifted. The camp was an entirely different time zone and it just worked. So if you can shift your camp's time zone and all your staff can come back from their time off on time and everything can happen accordingly, and you just like have extra daytime that the rest of the world doesn't have, then why can't we put in place systems for us to care for each other?
exactly. This is so true. I'm just still mind blown that there's people out there that just decide to change the time in their own little world. But like, this makes me think of the concept of the camp bubble. We create our bubble and what's in it. And as much as sometimes that's not great for certain reasons, but that's probably another discussion. This
Mhm.
bubble can allow us to have the autonomy to put in place processes and procedures and things that work for our communities.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I love about camp and the power of camp is the like ripple effect. And that's a phrase that's really been resonating with me for a variety of reasons recently. But the ripple effect is that your staff come to camp. And as Michael, our good friend Michael Brandwine from Chicago always says, you know, you're building better kids, right? But as camp directors, we're also building better humans. We're building better people because your staff, they come to camp and they see what camp can be like. They see this like little snapshot of what is like an incredible amount of like beauty and passion, and they can take that into the world with them. And hopefully they're a little bit kinder and stronger leaders and they see the world a little bit differently. Maybe they're more intentional or whatever value it is at your camp, they're taking that into the world with them. And that's incredible. What if you had strong community care and they were like, this is what the world could be? And they could take that out and extrapolate that and bring that into the quote unquote real world. And is it ever going to be as simple as just like copying and pasting from camp? Absolutely not. I mean, have you worked at an office that just has like paper bags lined up in the office where you can like put in warm and fuzzies for everybody outside of camp? Probably not. But hopefully people are like used to writing those like intentional warm and fuzzies and maybe they take that in some small way and turn it into the like put it into the corporate world.
Which reminds me, we should do that more often.
Exactly.
But yeah, and like, I'm just like, it's so, my mind is all of a sudden like in this spot, and it's like my mind's like on the peak of like coming up with a bunch of ideas, but it's like buzzing right now, just vibrating.
Percolating or percolating.
Yes, there's things happening, but they're not quite at peak potential yet.
All right. Well, we'll loop back. Maybe we'll do a second episode on Cassie's community care strategies. But I just think like what a great way to empower camp directors of like,
Yeah.
hey, you've created this world. Now care for it. And this is how we care for it. Like let's put a little bit, and I don't want to stress out directors. I know camp leadership is already under a lot of pressure, but like let's put some of the onus back on how can we create systems that allow us to care for people in meaningful ways.
And I think it's possible. And I want to remind people, you don't have to do this alone.
Hmm.
You are one camp director for your camp. What about that neighbor camp that's a camp director for their camp? And the one further down the road, or the one across the country that you have a good relationship with because you met them at some conference like 5 years ago.
Hmm.
No one said we have to do this alone. We can be our own community creating this.
No, and there's thousands of blog posts on like how to have good self-care at camp and encourage your staff to have good self-care. But what about how we create good community care? Because the other thing is that once you have systems in place,
They
these things just
exist.
flow naturally, right? Like you have systems in place for how the dishes get cleaned up in your dining hall after lunch every day. You
Mhm.
aren't recreating that every day and explaining the rules for a new system that you've thought of. You have a system in place and it cares for that space. It cares for the process of clearing the tables and getting the dishes back into the kitchen so that you can reset for the next meal. Well, it's the same thing when we care for our communities. We put the systems in place so they can exist, and we're going to dive into this a little bit more in terms of like how we can care for our communities. But once you do that initial work of the systems, it should flow from there.
Exactly. It's about our cultures and creating what we want.
It absolutely is. And I'm super stoked to get into this because we have a lot more to dive into, including I'm going to leave you with a quote and then we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. But the quote from an article, and we're going to link this article in the show notes because I think it's really powerful and I think every camp director should read it. It's that community care means showing up. It means that when you find yourself in the position of being able to give more than you need to receive, you do so. And that's so powerful. And I think, Cassie, you said before we started this that we're so good at this for our kids. Why are we not good at it for each other and for
Yeah.
our staff? But just that line of community care means showing up. This isn't about, as most things aren't, just throwing money at the problem. So we will dive right back into that. So stay tuned and hear more about what community care really means.
Looking for support from your colleagues, guidance about all things COVID related, or someone to talk to about best practices at camp? One of the top benefits we hear mentioned from our members at ACA Illinois is our camp advocates. These staff serve as your go-to person for questions, updates, and personalized service support. Join us today to learn more about their exclusive member benefits at acail.org.
Community care means showing up. Let's dive into that, Cassie. We recognize that all of our staff, directors, we all have different strengths. But when you hear this phrase, community care means showing up. It means that when you find yourself in the position of being able to give more than you need to receive, you do so. What does that mean to you? What does that spark in your mind?
To me, this speaks, I think, very much to who I am as a person and some very strong personality traits that I have that involve caring for people and making sure my people have all they need. So for me, a lot of this would be a bit more innate, I believe. So I think it's about holding space for individuals, for not finding the time to have conversations with people, but also to think creatively about what more can we provide, because we have a different time schedule, we have different things on our plate, to create new and unique ideas that can be of value and help our community of staff and campers learn more about the world and learn more about themselves and how to treat each other.
Yeah, when I read this quote, it struck me how simple it was.
Yeah, it's clean. If this is what I would call a clean quote.
I'm sure we could dive in and unpack that, what that means, but you clearly have a lot of thoughts on that. But like, it's simple. Like the instructions are there. Show up, and if you're in a position to give more than you need to receive, you do so. And then that also means, conversely, that if you're not in a position to give, then you're in a position to receive, and you deserve to receive that care. And I think often as camp folks, we struggle with that. We struggle with the idea that like, we can give and give and give, but we can't receive because we need to be leaders. And sometimes I think our staff are bad at that. I've seen staff do that all the time. That's how they get burned out 3 weeks into the summer, because they're giving and giving, and they don't understand that they can also receive some of that care. And we need to create a community that allows that to happen.
I think we need to let them know that it's okay to receive and that it's okay to ask for help as well.
And we need to create a space that it's not just up to the individual to say, I'm sorry, I need to step away to care for myself right now, but to create a space where the community says, hey, you need some care and we're here to prop you up during that time. Because that's very different. It's very different from one person having to say to the entire group. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm talking with my hands. It's very different for one person to say, I need to step away to care for myself and separate themselves from the group, versus the group saying, hey, you need to care for yourself. You've indicated that perhaps, or we've seen that. Welcome, come join us as we care for you and as we prop you up. Because it's a terrifying thing for an 18, 19-year-old, for anybody really, for us, to say, hey, I need to walk away from this to care for myself. Because there's FOMO, you don't want to let people down, you want to do your job, all of that. We know all those things.
Well, and I think it also, you may have feelings of being perceived as less than, or weak, or like some of those more negative terms when you're looking at your image, personal image, self-image, self-esteem. All of that is going to play a role as well.
I think it's also the understanding that all communities deserve to be cared for, and that you don't, And I think that's really important. When at camp, I think community care inherently exists for our campers, as you said, Cassie. Like that's what we do. But from a staff perspective, our staff deserve to be cared for the same way that our kids do. And I think that that's really important. Um, so let's think about community care and strengths when we look at our staff team, because our staff team is not all the same. You and I are not the same, Cassie.
Yeah.
What do you think community care can look like based on different people's strengths?
I think it can be, for some people, would be asking what somebody needs. Right?
Yeah.
For those people who are able to like better read emotions or feelings and all that, it's going to be like looking at somebody being like, hey, I don't think they're okay, and checking in with them. Or it might look like, I feel like love languages are going to be important in this concept for some reason.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I think this is where we learn, because it's about how people receive feedback, or how people receive gifts, or how people feel valued, right? So if we know how people, typically how you receive is also how you give. So if we have an idea of how we receive, we know where that person's personal strengths are and how they're probably going to give as well. And each person's going to be different and unique, and we can utilize those to ensure everybody's needs are met. Does that make sense? Am I like way off the boat here, or am I just in a weird place?
No, I like that. You can tell that you live on the coast because you're like, my way off the boat here versus way off tracks for those of us who are landlocked. Yeah, I think everybody does give and receive affection and care in different ways. And I think love languages, there's a lot around that. We don't need to really dive into that too deeply. But it's the idea that, like, Cassie, you might love when somebody says to you, hey, Cassie, you're doing a really great job, and gives you really specific feedback. Like, it's fantastic that you always send me calendar invites so that I know when to show up, and I appreciate that. And that, like, your love language, the way you might enjoy receiving that compliment, and I enjoy the act of service of you setting up calendar invites so that I could show up places on time, like to this podcast recording.
We play to our strengths.
Exactly. But that in itself is community care, because you and I mean, it's a community of two people plus our producers who we love dearly. And the Go Camp Pro team, but the community there is that we have found a way to prop each other up and create systems that work for each other. And I think that that's what it looks like at camp. It's co-counselors who balance each other out. It's leadership's team who know that maybe the issue is getting kids to breakfast on time. And so we start by having better wake ups, or leadership staff that can like come in and help with getting kids out of bed, things like that. It's those systems that prop people up so people aren't fighting the systems themselves.
Yeah, exactly. That simplified my words of what felt like jumbledness.
No, those were great words. So you said you were percolating, and so I'm going to try and draw some of this out. But like, what do you think? You were talking about, like, you were like, oh, I have some ideas of like what this could look like. And I'm going to jump back to something you mentioned to me in a previous conversation about a conference that you're at recently.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it was funny. You were like, oh, I was having this conversation, and I was like, that would fit perfectly with what we're going to talk about.
Exactly. So I recently headed out to Alberta and became a landlocked creature. Don't recommend it for my personal being ever again, but I will. But we were in like a roundtable kind of kindred group and talking about mental health and how we can better prepare our staff to arrive at camp. And there's so many things we can do. And this conversation created this little community of people that's actually going to go out and kind of become like a mastermind group-ish concept where they can connect on a regular basis and try to solve some of these bigger issue problems for their community. And what was so great was like not only the sharing of ideas, but the pushback they gave each other when it wasn't fully clear, like, oh no, hey, but what about budget or this and that? But so there was like that whole sense of like these people trying to solve a problem, a greater problem. But things that came out of it were like, how can we utilize our alumni staff to kind of create mentorships with our new staff coming in so that they have more tools before they arrive at camp, or somebody they can call that's outside of camp to better support them or to help guide them when they're struggling with something that they don't feel comfortable with at that point. Or maybe it's, opening up the doors to camp a few days early and you're all like, oh my God, that's so much money. But bringing your staff in early, not to train them, but to do community building, to give them time and space to sleep, to rest, to reflect on their year, to bring in mental health supports or counselors, social workers, whatever you think your group might need, to give them the skills before camp even starts, before you even dive into training, to help them be better humans, where we provide, free flow meals and very different things that help build people up before they dive in. And this is kind of like all sparked off of even me thinking of, like, I believe it's Beth Allison that says it consistently, staff arrive at camp with, I can never remember the specific number, but it's ridiculously large number of days of missing sleep. So they're already below where they need to be because their community at wherever they are hasn't given them, or they're young people and they're young, are having a different sleep schedule, and it doesn't help them be successful. So I think we need to figure out those steps that we can help build them back up, to figure out what each individual community is going to look different, and giving them the skills to connect with each other and figure out what they need to build their community up.
Yeah, I love that. I think we've talked about a lot of really great ways that community care resonates with camp and is related to camp, and how we need to shift from self-care to community care. And that's not to say that we don't want our young people to take responsibility for taking care of themselves, because they do, and that's an important part. And that ties to this other quote from the article. We are absolutely going to link this in the show notes because it's a fabulous article. And the quote is, ultimately, community care is a commitment to contributing in a way that leverages one's relative privilege while balancing one's needs. It's trusting that your community will have you when you need support, and knowing that you can be trusted to provide the same. So as we look sort of to wrap up this episode, I really want to talk about how we can create an environment or a culture that fosters community care in a genuine way. And the genuineness of this is important, right? Because we could write warm and fuzzies, till you're blue in the face till the dogs come home. Is that the phrase, till the dogs come home? I don't know that that's the phrase. But
I don't know. It
anyways,
sounded great.
thanks. Yeah, if anybody knows, send me a message and let me know if I messed that up. But this quote, the piece of, it's trusting that your community will have you when you need support, and knowing that you can be trusted to provide the same. That's the key part here, is that it has to go both ways. You have to find a way to build this into your camp's culture, that you care for them and they care for you, and that everybody's caring for each other and they're looking out for each other. And so it could start with that weekend that Cassie's talking about, where you're just at camp and they're enjoying themselves and they're catching up on sleep and you're caring for them. But how do we create, and Cassie, I'm going to look to you on this, like, how do we create a space where folks are looking to care for each other?
It's trust. I'm going to just put it like building trusted relationships with each other. Trust makes a big difference. And because when you trust someone, you're more willing to talk to them, you're more willing to share with them. You have a different level of kind of commitment and involvement in that person's experiences as well, I think. So, and I think it's just right there in the quote as well, trust. And for me, when I look at my staff team, they aren't earning trust. They do not earn trust with me. They are given trust. It is inherent from the get-go. And I think if we can somehow, I do not can't tell you how to do that. I do not I cannot remember specific steps that I did to get myself to this place. But it's just, I think, giving them confidence and skills and knowledge to build them up, and then stepping back and being like, you can do this, and continuing that provided support. And that's going to look different for each person too.
Absolutely. Perhaps it's about teaching our staff as a community what it looks like to ask for help, and then what it looks like to give and offer help. And I'm going to put another link in the show notes. This is going to be a link heavy episode, but jack.org, which is an organization dedicated to young people's mental health here in Canada. Might be outside of Canada as well, but they have a program called Be There, and it teaches, and they just came out with a new certificate, and it teaches folks how to be there for each other in a way that understands that we aren't our friends' therapists or our counselors, but that peer support is important and how do we effectively be there for somebody. And so I think we need to teach our staff how to do that. Like, what does it
Yeah.
look like to care for your community in a way that's genuine, that's not overstepping? Because I know that there is nothing I hate more than my friend coming up to me and being like, wow, Rachel, you look exhausted. Have you slept recently? And me being like, wow, you have no idea what's going on in my life. Please step back. Like that, just
Mhm.
like it irks me. But somebody coming up to me being like, hey, can I do anything for you? Can I take this off your plate? Have you thought about going to do this thing for yourself? I respond much better to that. So maybe we need to teach our staff how to have these conversations, things to look out for. We
Mhm.
don't want to create an environment where they're like tattling on each other to management, being like, this person looks exhausted. This person was up till 3 a.m. Um, but teaching them how to have those conversations.
Yeah. To have the confidence to go into those conversations.
Hmm. And creating an environment of respect where people are looking to do those things for each other because they care for each other. And some of
Mhm.
that comes through like shared experiences and like strong leadership and mentorship as well. But I think that piece of your staff understanding that they will be cared for and they also need to care for others is really important. It has to go both ways.
Yeah. My brain's trying to think of like, how do you get them to that place of understanding that it goes both ways and that it takes both sides to create this environment.
I think young people want to be empowered, right? Like they want to know
Mhm.
that they could do something. And so I think teaching them, like, here are ways that you can reach out to your friends, that you can talk to each other. I think community care also, we used to have every staff member would get downtime during the day. So it was an hour and a half where
Mhm.
they didn't have to do anything. They had to be available to like respond in an emergency, but
Yeah.
they could nap, shower, go kayaking, walk my dog. I always really appreciated that because I didn't have time for that. But that hour and a half, that was community care in itself, and the community knew that that time existed and they would say to other people, they'd be like, are you working on your downtime? Like you shouldn't be lesson planning right now. You shouldn't be making these like props for a play. Like you should be taking care of yourself. And so that was community care built into each other into itself because they were
Mhm.
keeping each other in check. We just didn't realize that was what was happening.
So I think there's an air of accountability for each other and for yourself in there too.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it there, Cassie, unless you have
Yeah.
any final thoughts. But I just really love this piece. It's trusting your community will have you when you need support and knowing you can be
Mhm.
trusted to provide the same.
I don't think we need to go any further than that. So we want to thank everyone for listening today and joining us beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us wherever we may go. As we wrap up, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with ourselves, myself and Rachel, and you can do so by emailing us at beyondcamp@gocamp.pro. And I believe our LinkedIn profiles are connected in our show notes as well. Please remember to check out those show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. And some thank yous, as always, to the team at GoCamp Pro for continuing to hold space for these conversations, to ACA Illinois for their sponsorship and support of us, to our producers, Matt and Jotham, for their dedication and commitment to making us sound amazing each and every week, and to you, our listeners. You let us move forward. Beyond Camp is part of the GoCamp Pro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next time.